Grant Miller nearly dropped his mop when a shout tore through the air. "Hey, floor guy, come up here and show us something." The entire Evergreen Combat Dojo in Seattle froze for a sharp breath. Under the harsh white neon lights, Tyler Rhodes, the youngest black belt instructor in the dojo, stood in the middle of the mat with a crooked, mocking smile twisting his whole face. His eyes skimmed over Grant, as if he were nothing more than excess clutter. But Grant simply set the mop down, the old instinct to avoid trouble making him bow his head slightly, as he murmured, barely audible, "I don't want to disturb the class." At 42, Grant was the new janitor, 3 weeks into the job, always arriving late enough to avoid everyone, and moving quietly enough not to be noticed. But tonight, Tyler's advanced class was still running. All 8 students stood in a line, almost holding their breath as they watched the scene unfold. "You're not disturbing anything," Tyler barked a laugh, the sound bouncing off the glass walls. "You just need to show us whether you even know how to stand in guard. Or have you spent your whole life holding a mop?" A few weak laughs broke out. Some students averted their eyes. Some looked uncomfortable, but no one dared interrupt Tyler's oversized ego. Grant bowed his head again and scrubbed at a stain on the floor as if silence were the only armor he had left in this world. But deep inside, something long dormant stirred. Tyler walked toward Grant with the slow, swaggering confidence of a man used to being king of a very small kingdom. "Come on, old man," he said, voice sweetened to the point of fakery. "Don't tell me you've never stepped on a mat in your life." Grant stopped his fingers still wet from cleaning solution, his eyes drifting down to the reflection of the neon lights. For a fleeting moment, something pressed against his memory. The shouting crowds, the blinding lights, the smell of sweat and hand wraps the final seconds of a friend lying motionless on the canvas. But Grant swallowed it down and shook his head. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job," Tyler repeated, stretching each word as if savoring it, "is cleaning. My job is teaching martial arts. And tonight I want to teach with a live example." He turned to his students and raised his hand. "Watch closely. This is why hierarchy exists in martial arts." Several faces tightened with discomfort. A few students looked down, feeling second-hand shame for the man standing in the middle of the cold wooden floor. But fear of Tyler's retaliation kept everyone silent. Everyone but one. Megan O'Reilly, 22, purple belt, brown hair, tied-back eyes, full of fairness, finally spoke. "Sensei Tyler," she said, her voice soft but clear in the silent room. "Can we continue the drill?" "This isn't necessary." Tyler snapped his head toward her, cold and sharp. "Megan O'Reilly," he emphasized each syllable like a warning. "Are you questioning my teaching methods?" Megan stayed silent, but her gaze didn't drop. Grant saw that, and his heart clenched. That same look, Emma's look, his little sister who always stood up for others, even when it cost her life, in the moment he could never forget. Tyler stepped closer and placed a hand on Grant's shoulder, a gentle touch laced with humiliation. "Did you hear me get on the mat?" Grant didn't flinch. The touch meant nothing to him like a breeze brushing past. But Tyler frowned, as if he had pressed against something unmovable. The dojo fell silent. Time seemed to slow, every breath echoing like waves in an enclosed room. A quiet, instinctive fear spread through the students, a dawning sense that the man holding the mop was not what he seemed. Grant lifted his head. His eyes met Tyler's. There was no anger, no challenge, only a deep stillness, a calm so profound it felt dangerous. "If I step on that mat," Grant said, his voice low and steady, like a lake before a storm when we are done. You will apologize to everyone here for turning this place into a joke." Tyler's laugh died almost immediately in his throat, and in that moment, everyone felt something shift. No one knew who Grant Miller truly was. No one knew he had once ruled the MMA world under the name Grant the Phantom Miller, undefeated in 47 fights. No one knew he had vanished from the sport after the horrific night that took the life of his closest friend, Jack Morrison. No one knew. Until tonight, when the floor guy finally raised his head, and the storm he spent 20 years burying began to rise. Tyler stepped back half a pace, his heart skipping for a reason he couldn't name. Not fear. Not Grant. Something deeper, primal, the instinct awakened when a person unknowingly stands before true strength. But the feeling passed. Arrogance buried everything. Tyler rolled his shoulders, tightened his black belt, lifted his chin in challenge. "Fine," he said, with a cold grin. "Let's see what you can do." And Grant simply placed the mop gently on the floor. He stood upright, took one step onto the mat. One single step. But it changed the entire room. Some students held their breath without realizing it. Megan O'Reilly felt a shiver run up her spine, sensing something extraordinary about to unfold. Grant tightened his hands, slightly feeling the tatami beneath his feet, a surface foreign for 20 years, but suddenly familiar enough to ache. He didn't want this. He didn't want to return. But there are moments in life when silence is pushed too far, until it must rise. And tonight was that moment. The moment the man the world had forgotten finally refused to stay quiet. The phantom had returned with a single breath, a single look, a final warning for the arrogant young man who had no idea he was poking at a volcano waking from its slumber. And from that second on, no one in that room would ever be the same again. Tyler Rhodes rolled his neck and warmed up his shoulders as if preparing for another routine demonstration, but his breath trembled ever so slightly, a detail so small even he failed to notice it. Grant Miller stood there with his back straight and his arms relaxed at his sides, looking no different from any ordinary middle-aged man, if one ignored the strange tension spreading through the room, a tension that silenced everyone as if they were witnessing something far beyond their understanding. "You ready, floor guy?" Tyler sneered, trying to stitch back together the confidence that had been falling apart. A moment later, he felt the need to speak louder, sharper. "I'll go easy so you don't break a bone." The students behind him let out thin, shaky laughs, some even stepping back a pace, as if instinct warned them they needed distance to stay safe. Megan O'Reilly watched Grant, her heart beat, quickening without reason. There was something about this man, the way he stood, the way he breathed, the way he seemed to read the entire room, not with his eyes, but with instincts shaped by someone who had lived too long on a fighting stage. Grant looked at Tyler, his voice dropping low, like stones tumbling down a ravine. "Begin." Tyler didn't wait a single second. He lunged, fast, precise. A textbook perfect jab, straight and controlled. But Grant wasn't there. The punch sliced through empty air as if stabbing straight into a void. Tyler didn't see how he moved, didn't understand why the target vanished in the span of a heartbeat. The students held their breath. Megan's eyes widened. Grant had only tilted his head slightly, just enough to let the jab pass through his hair, so effortless that Tyler had no time to process what had happened. He dodged that a student whispered. "No, it's like he disappeared," another murmured. Tyler jerked back half a step, his hands lifting into guard, pulled up by reflex, from a fear he didn't want to acknowledge. But the fear only fueled his anger. "All right," he growled. "You want serious, then serious it is." This time, he launched a 3-hit combo jab, crosshook, his signature sequence 1 he had used to drop countless amateur fighters in this very dojo. But Grant still wasn't there. Every strike Tyler threw found only air, and Grant moved just enough, never wasting a single motion. He dipped under the jab so closely it brushed his hair, leaned back in a perfect arc that left the cross only a sheet of paper, away from grazing his cheek, then slid half a step back as the hook carved through empty space, its cold wind scraping across his jaw without touching him. Everything happened too fast, too smooth, too exact, as if the 42-year-old man in front of them wasn't a janitor at all, but something else entirely. "No way," Tyler gasped between breaths. Grant didn't answer. He only looked at him with unsettling calm. "You're punching at empty space." Grant said, his voice quiet but carrying through the room. "Not because you're weak, but because you're fighting your ego, not a real opponent." The insult sent heat flooding through Tyler's face, igniting the rage that came from bruised pride. He roared and unleashed a wild storm of strikes, kicks, elbows, knees, everything he had. But not a single blow touched Grant. Not one. Grant slid, shifted, dipped, leaned, moving like smoke, slipping past every attack. He didn't counter. He didn't strike back. He didn't even tense. He simply observed. The more Tyler attacked, the more he revealed. His left shoulder twitched before every hook. His hips rotated too early before his kicks. His eyes dropped before he threw a knee. Grant saw every detail, and that was when he spoke right in the middle of the fight. "Your left shoulder rises before every punch. I see it before your strike. Your knee is locked. Your breathing is uneven. Your weight is on the wrong foot." Tyler froze mid-step. The entire dojo froze with him. A man who was currently fighting was being corrected in real time by someone dodging every one of his attacks without even breaking a sweat. It was beyond anything they could comprehend. Megan felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had watched hundreds of martial arts videos to study fighter psychology, but she had never seen anyone move and analyze at the same time like this. These were not reactions of someone who merely trained in martial arts. This was the instinct of a true champion. Tyler stumbled backward, his breathing so ragged he could no longer hold his stance. Who are you?" he panted. Grant looked at him, eyes gentle, almost sad, like he was looking at a younger version of himself, back when he had been full of arrogance and lacking control. "I told you," Grant said softly. "When this ends, you will apologize to all of them." Tyler screamed, as if fear inside him was being smothered by pride. "I will not lose to a floor guy." He charged one last time with all the strength he had left. But this time, Grant didn't dodge. He simply raised his right hand. No wind-up, no hip rotation, no elbow pull. He just placed his palm on the center of Tyler's chest, gently, like touching a glass window. And Tyler flew backward nearly 2 meters. The room went dead silent. No one believed what they had just seen. No one understood what had just happened. Tyler lay still for several seconds, eyes wide, unable to speak. Grant looked at him without gloating, without arrogance, without celebration. Only regret, the regret of someone who once lost himself in the world Tyler was trying to imitate. The air in the dojo thickened. Silence swallowed everything. Megan covered her mouth, her heart pounding uncontrollably. The students behind her barely dared to breathe. Tyler clawed himself upright, staring at Grant with terror, as if he were looking at a ghost. What are you?" he whispered. Grant bent down, picked up the mop and said in a low, quiet voice, a final warning, I was something you should never have provoked. Then he turned away. Tyler and everyone in that dojo had no idea that this moment was only the beginning, because the real storm had just awakened. Grant stood in the center of the tatami with steady breath and eyes as calm as still water, while Tyler remained on the ground, hands braced behind him, staring at the man he once thought was nothing more than a pitiful janitor. Sweat streamed down Tyler's temples, but what made him tremble was not pain. It was a nameless fear, the primal instinct that warns a person when they are facing someone far stronger than they can comprehend. No one in the dojo dared to speak. Not a single student dared to move. Only the soft hum of the air conditioner above and the frantic pounding of Tyler's own heartbeat filled the room stretched tight like a drawn bowstring. Megan O'Reilly kept her eyes locked on Grant, her palms damp with sweat. She did not know what she was looking at, or rather she was realizing she was witnessing a piece of history none of them ever imagined they would see unfold in front of them. Grant did not look at anyone. He simply bent down to pick up the fallen mop, his hand trembling slightly, partly from memory and partly from what he knew was coming, because the door to the past he had locked away for more than 20 years had cracked open the moment he stepped onto the mat. And old ghosts never let him go. Who are you?" Tyler stammered, his voice breaking, stripped of every ounce of arrogance. Grant closed his eyes, took a slow breath, and a wave of memory crashed into him with brutal force. Blinding arena lights, thunderous cheers from tens of thousands of fans in a stadium in Las Vegas, the dull thud of gloves hitting heavy bags, his coach yelling from the corner of the ring, and finally, the sound he could never erase, the sickening thud of a body hitting the mat, heavy and final. Grant opened his eyes, but they seemed to see straight through the entire room, through Tyler, through time itself, back to the night that destroyed him. "I used to be someone you never wanted to meet," Grant said softly, but each word dropped onto the floor like stone. Tyler's breath caught. "Used to be." Grant lifted his head, and something flickered in his eyes that made Megan's spine turn cold. "Yes," he said, "quietly used to be." His voice deepened, as if he were forcing himself to confront everything he had run from. 22 years ago at the Las Vegas National Training Hall, I was not a janitor. I was Grant the Phantom Miller. A faint thud sounded the water bottle of a student slipping from his hand. The entire dojo froze. Megan raised her hand to her mouth. Tyler's jaw hung open, his face draining of color. A legend, the undefeated man, the 5-time MMA world champion, the fighter who had never lost a match. No way Megan breathed, barely audible. Grant did not look at her. He looked at the cleaning rag in his hand, as if he were staring into the fate he had never escaped. I left the ring at the peak of my career, when everyone believed I was unbeatable, when they thought I was the strongest. Grant closed his eyes, but they never knew the truth, and the truth always finds a way back, even when one runs as far as he did. Grant stopped wiping the floor. He stood upright, no longer avoiding anything, his eyes carrying the exhaustion of a soul wounded too deeply. That night in the training room, I killed someone. The dojo shattered into pure silence. Tyler swallowed hard, the sound sharp in the heavy quiet. Megan clenched her fists, her heart twisting, as she watched the man confront his past with a voice that trembled. Jack Morrison Grant continued. His voice hoarse was my best friend. He trained with me for 3 years. He was the first to believe I could become a champion, the only one who stood up for me when the world called me a nobody who didn't belong. Grant took a deep breath, his chest shaking slightly. But that night, because of an article saying I was just lucky, saying I wasn't truly skilled, I let my anger take over. Megan felt her throat tighten. Tyler gripped the tatami, no longer having any ground to stand on. Grant kept speaking every word, like a blade, cutting into himself. Jack and I were sparring. He was not defending well. I hit too hard, too fast, too angry. Grant opened his eyes, and one single strike sent him to the floor. His head hit the mat. Grant's fingers curled into a fist. He never woke up. The air conditioner suddenly sounded louder, as if the room itself was trying to drown out the painful silence. I won 5 world championships, Grant said, but I lost the only thing that mattered. I lost myself. Megan felt her eyes sting. Tyler looked down, his hands trembling, as he realized how childish his arrogance was compared to the unbearable weight this man carried. Grant looked at Tyler, not as a master looks at a student, but as someone who had fallen into the abyss, looking at someone still standing on the edge. "You think martial arts is strength?" Grant asked. Tyler could not answer. "Martial arts is responsibility," Grant whispered. "It is knowing when to strike and when you must never strike. It is understanding that one wrong blow can change someone's entire life." Grant's eyes clouded over, lost in the fog of memory. "I quit fighting. I left my belts, left my fame, left everything." He looked at his hands, because these hands did something that did not deserve forgiveness. Megan inhaled sharply and stepped forward half a step, then stopped, afraid of shattering this fragile moment, afraid that Grant might retreat back into his silence. "You became a janitor because of that?" she asked softly. Grant nodded. "I chose a small life, no spotlight, no rivals, no need to prove anything. I just wanted to live without hurting anyone ever again." Then he looked at Tyler, and what happened next shocked Megan the most, because Grant's eyes held no hatred, no anger, only sorrow. "You remind me of who I used to be," Grant said, thinking I was unbeatable, thinking I was above others, thinking I had the right to make them feel small. Tyler bowed his head, tears flooding his eyes, his voice shaking. I didn't know. I'm sorry." Grant set the mop down on the floor. He took a long breath. "Apologizing is the first step," he said, gently. "But change is what truly matters." Tyler nodded over and over, as if terrified to miss the only lifeline he had been offered. Grant turned to the frozen line of students. "Look closely," he said, his voice firm without being harsh. "This is not a lesson about fighting. It is a lesson about consequences." In Megan's eyes, Grant no longer looked like a worn-out janitor, no longer like a legendary MMA fighter, but like a man who had lost too much, yet still chose what was right. And in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that Grant Miller's life was about to change again. Not because of violence, but because truth had finally been released from the darkness after more than 20 years. And when truth is spoken, another door begins to open, making everyone in that room realize they had just witnessed a moment from which there was no return. A moment that signaled this was only the beginning. The air inside Evergreen Combat Dojo thickened like storm fog after Grant revealed everything about his past. Confusion, shock, fear, awe, and guilt blended together in a moment that felt endless. But the strangest thing was not what Grant said, it was what spread from him, an invisible force still as stone and deep as the ocean, a presence that made everyone in the room sense they were standing before a man the world once bowed to. Tyler remained seated on the floor, eyes wide, his body trembling with every breath. He no longer knew how to see Grant as an enemy, a stranger, or a god he had accidentally insulted. Every insult he had thrown minutes earlier replayed in his mind, each one crashing onto him like tons of stone. Megan stepped closer, her voice unsteady with emotion. "You still kept all those skills after all these years." Grant looked at her, not proud, not ashamed, simply honest. "Skills do not disappear," he said. "They sleep." And the way he said the word sleep made everyone shiver, because what they had just seen was not the skill of a man remembering old moves after 2 decades. It was the instinct of a beast that had slept too long and had just opened its eyes. Tyler struggled to stand, his legs shaking, every trace of his former arrogance stripped away. I have never seen anyone move like you," he said, his voice trying to cling to reason. Grant did not answer right away. He lifted his head and looked around the dojo, the mirrors reflecting the lights, the heavy bags swaying slightly from the shifting air, the mats that had soaked the sweat and blood of countless fighters through the years. Everything seemed to awaken with him. For 20 years, Grant said, his voice low, like a drum echoing in the depths of his chest, "I stayed away from the ring." But the body does not forget. It only waits for a call. Tyler frowned. A call from who? Grant looked straight at him. "From you." A wave of chills rippled through every spine in the room. Megan covered her mouth. A student stepped back instinctively, because they understood tonight was not just Tyler insulting Grant. Tonight, Tyler had dragged his ghost back. And when that ghost appeared, it brought with it the world Grant had spent his life running from. "You could defeat me without hitting me," Tyler whispered. Grant shook his head. "I did not want to defeat you. I wanted you to see the consequence of arrogance. I wanted you to understand what I did not when I was your age." Tyler lowered his head. For the first time, he looked at Grant not as a rival or a superior, but as a student before a master. But Grant was not finished. He stepped into the center of the mat and stood still like a living statue carved from stone. "All of you," Grant said, his voice deep and firm. "Look closely." Silence fell over the dojo, thick and absolute. Grant began moving, slow movements impossibly controlled, yet every motion carried a force that felt like it could crack the air. He rolled his shoulders, lowered his center of gravity, touched his knee to the floor as gently as a leaf touching water, then rose again with a smooth power like wind through a forest. His movements were not fast, but they made every heart beat faster. Because the students recognized this posture, this precision, they had only ever seen it in old archival footage of grandmasters, and even video could not compare to the presence standing before them. Megan swallowed hard. "Is that Tai Chi, or internal strength, or no?" Grant replied without turning. "This is something I had to create after Jack died." The room fell silent again. Tyler let out a shaky exhale, almost like a sob. You are the first person I have ever seen who is not strong because of his punches, but strong because of his stillness." Grant stopped his breath, steady but heavy. "Stillness is not a gift. It is the price I paid." Tyler bowed his head. Megan pressed a hand to her chest to steady her racing heart. But Grant was still not done. "I had to learn to control every millimeter of my movement. I had to know where every strike would land. I had to know what every breath cost, Because one wrong beat can kill someone. The room went motionless. They all understood his words were not philosophy. They were truth carved from tragedy. Grant looked at the students. You think strength is what helps you win, but it is not. Strength only helps you choose how not to hurt someone. Tyler shivered while Megan clenched her fists. They were not listening to a martial arts lesson. They were listening to a confession and a warning. Grant turned, a movement as light as a cloud. But in everyone's eyes the world slowed. His stance was perfect, his balance absolute, his gaze stretched outward, as if he could see every possible attack before it existed. This, Grant said, is what I buried. Megan's breath caught her lungs, refusing to move. Tyler whispered, "My God." Grant lifted his hand and twisted his wrist a fraction of an inch. Just a fraction. And the air cracked with a sharp pop that echoed through the dojo like thunder trapped in a small room. A few students gasped. Tyler stumbled back. Megan whispered, "That is not strength of an ordinary human." Grant lowered his hand as if it were nothing. This is why I had to walk away from everything he said. And this is why I never wanted to come back. Tyler lifted his head, eyes red. "But tonight you came back." Grant studied him for a long moment. "Not to fight," he replied, "but to remind you that arrogance is not strength. Control is strength." Megan felt chills spread over her entire body. Every word Grant spoke hit Tyler and everyone else. Then Grant said the final sentence, the one that split the air open. "Because if I had not controlled myself tonight, you would not still be standing." Tyler's knees buckled, trembling violently. Grant stepped back and picked up the mop as if he had merely paused during an ordinary task. But none of the students looked at him as a janitor anymore. None of them saw him as an ordinary man. They saw him as a legend, a ghost so powerful it frightened them, a man who had just awakened a strength he had tried to bury for 2 decades. And in that moment, none of them knew that what had awakened inside Grant Miller would not easily go back to sleep. This was only the beginning. The air inside Evergreen Combat Dojo grew thick like fog before a storm after Grant revealed everything about his past. Confusion, shock, fear, respect, and even guilt wove together in a moment that felt endless. Yet the strangest thing was not what Grant confessed, but the presence spreading from him, an invisible force, still as stone and deep as the ocean, making everyone in the room feel they were standing before a man the entire world once bowed to. Tyler was still unsteady on his feet as Grant stepped back toward the mop, but Tyler's eyes no longer held defiance, no longer held the arrogance of an instructor who once believed he was above everyone else. He looked at Grant the way someone looks at a storm that had just torn through their life, silent yet capable of crushing every illusion they ever clung to. Megan O'Reilly bit her lip, her heartbeat racing, her gaze trembling as she tried to assemble the scattered pieces of truth to understand the man standing before them. She had studied sports physiology, combat techniques, neurological reflexes, but nothing she had ever learned matched what she had witnessed. This was not strength. This was perfect harmony between instinct and control, something only legends possessed. "You," Megan stuttered. Why would you choose a life like this? Why clean the gym instead of teaching if you are capable of all that?" Grant looked at her, and in his eyes was a warmth that felt like seeing the shadow of someone he once loved in a distant memory. "Because I do not believe I deserve it," he said, his voice low and hoarse, as if it had crawled out of an old wound. "Not deserve it," Megan whispered. "After everything you can do." Grant did not answer immediately. He turned and looked at the tall mirrors around them. Reflected in them was a 42-year-old man with strands of grey in his hair, a simple janitor's shirt, worn-out shoes, nothing resembling the fighter who once stood under bright lights before thousands of roaring spectators. The sight made Megan's heart sink. Tyler dug his fingers into the edge of the mat, struggling to steady his breath. "You think you do not deserve it because of an accident," Grant turned back. His eyes sharpened deep enough to make Tyler bow his head. "It was not an accident," Grant said slowly. "It was my fault." The dojo fell into a quiet so heavy it felt like gravity itself had deepened. "The last time I fought with full force was 20 years ago," Grant continued, "when I let anger control me." He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. And Jack paid the price. Tyler swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He had never imagined a punch could take someone's life, but standing in front of Grant, he understood his own arrogance could have easily pushed him toward the same fate if the man across from him had been anyone else. After that day, Grant said softly, "I swore these hands would never hurt anyone again." Tyler lowered his face, his breath trembling. "If I had known," Grant cut him off gently, "if you had known, you would have respected me. But what about the people you do not know? The people you never cared to know? The people without glory, who never had a title big enough to make you show them respect?" Tyler had no answer. Megan felt something crash inside her chest, painful but full of truth she had never considered. Grant stepped toward Tyler, not threatening, simply standing with a presence so powerful it left no room to hide. "You asked me who I am," Grant said, "and tonight you saw it. But the more important question is who you are when you do not have a black belt, when you do not have authority, when no student is afraid of you." Tyler felt the words hit him like a blow straight to the heart. Megan whispered, "That is a question for all of us." Grant turned toward the circle of students. Their eyes were wide, tense, a mixture of fear, respect, and disbelief. No one saw him as the janitor anymore. No one saw him as an ordinary man. They were staring at a monument that had tried to bury itself. "You think martial arts is punches, kicks, and techniques," Grant said. "But it is something else. It is the reminder that every movement carries responsibility. The true strength never comes from loudness. It comes from silence." He looked at Tyler. "You become loud because you fear people seeing your weakness." Tyler trembled. Grant continued, "You insulted me because you feared losing your place." Tyler turned away, eyes burning. Megan glanced at him with sympathy. Grant lowered his voice, soft, yet echoing through the dojo. "But the truth is, no one can take what was never truly yours, and strength is not used to keep others beneath you. It is used to lift them up." Megan held back tears. She had studied sports psychology for 2 years, but no lesson had ever pierced the essence of martial arts this clearly. Tyler let out a choked sound, trying to hide it, but everyone heard. Grant stepped back. "I did not return tonight to prove strength," he said. "I returned because of her." He looked toward Megan, making her freeze. "Because you were the only one who spoke the truth when everyone else stayed silent. You reminded me of Emma." Megan whispered. Emma Grant nodded his eyes, sinking into a fog of memory. "My sister," he said, his voice suddenly soft and unbearably painful. "She spoke the truth until her last moment." Megan clasped her hands, her eyes stinging. A harsh silence fell over the dojo. Grant continued, his voice heavy as stone. "And tonight when you stood up, I realized I could not keep running." Megan pressed her hand to her chest, unable to speak. Grant turned to Tyler. "Tonight is not about me. It is about you." Tyler's eyes widened. Grant continued, each word sinking deep. "You have two choices. One, continue, letting your ego control you. Continue frightening others and end up alone in a prison you build for yourself. Two," he took a slow breath, "learn again. From humility." Tyler looked up, lips trembling. "I want to change." "Wanting is not enough," Grant said. "You must do it." Tyler nodded hard, as if swallowing an oath into his soul. For the first time in his proud life, he became smaller, so he could grow. Megan exhaled shakily. The other students exchanged glances, unsure whether they had witnessed a class, a confession, or an awakening. But in the air, every one of them understood one thing. The story was not finished. Because the moment Grant stepped onto the mat tonight was only the first chapter. A chapter he had avoided for 20 years. And now that the truth had been revealed, all their lives were about to change in ways none of them could predict. This was no longer an ordinary night. This was the night true strength, not of muscle but of humanity, returned. And once it returns, there is no turning back. No one inside Evergreen Combat Dojo thought anything bigger could possibly happen that night. The truth Grant had just revealed was already enough to make everyone's skin prickle. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. The deepest part, the part capable of shaking the outside world, was sitting quietly in Megan O'Reilly's trembling hands inside a phone that had just flashed to life. She had not intended to search. She did not want to intrude on the private pain of the man who had just laid bare 2 decades of silence. But the instinct of a researcher mixed with the powerful intuition she felt when she watched Grant move, pushed her fingers to type into the search bar Grant Miller, MMA. And what appeared made her gasp. Oh my God, everyone in the dojo whipped around. Tyler's head jerked up. Even Grant froze. Megan stared at her screen as if it held something supernatural. No way, it really is you," she whispered, her voice shaking. Grant closed his eyes, as if he had long known this moment would come. "Let me see Tyler," said his voice, stripped of authority, thin like a frightened child. Megan turned the screen towards them. On it were hundreds of results, the enlarged name and image of a man 20 years younger, with the same eyes as Grant, sharp as blades, standing in a ring with sweat-soaked gloves. Grant the Phantom, Miller, 47, wins 0 losses, 5-time world champion, killer reflexes, the man you cannot hit, the legend who walked away. Tyler slapped a hand over his mouth, stumbling back as if someone had punched him. "My God, no way! You are the legend." The students swarmed behind Megan to see. One young man blurted, "I watched your videos since I was a kid. My dad told me. Stories about you forever." A girl gasped, "I thought you were dead. Everyone thought you vanished from America without a trace." Megan whispered. "He did not vanish." He chose silence. Grant stood still, his entire being sinking into the fog of memories pressing onto him. "Phantom means ghost," one student murmured. "No one could hit you right," Grant exhaled. A long, heavy, hurting breath. "That is nothing to be proud of," he said slowly. "I did not hit people?" "Yes. But I once hit someone only once, and that was enough to destroy everything." Megan looked at him, eyes red. "But you did not mean to." Grant nodded faintly. "I did not mean to. But that does not bring Jack back." Tyler took a shaky step toward Grant, still trembling, but his eyes had changed completely. Minutes ago, he saw Grant as beneath him. Now he looked at Grant the way someone looks at a mountain far too massive to comprehend the peak. "Sensei," he whispered. A simple word. But for Tyler, it was the first time he had ever said it with true respect. Grant flinched slightly. "Do not call me that." "But you deserve it," Tyler said, his voice trembling, not from fear, but from emotion. "I have never seen anyone use strength like you. Never seen anyone control themselves like that. Never seen anyone who could kill me in 1 second and choose not to." Grant was silent. "Someone like that," Tyler continued, "is a sensei in every way that matters." The students around them nodded without hesitation. They did not need guidance. They did not need instruction. They looked at Grant like one looks at a true teacher, not because of technique, but because of the truth he had shown them tonight. Megan stepped forward, the phone still gripped tightly in her hands. You can pretend to be a janitor. You can stay silent for 20 years. But everything you did tonight, the way you slipped past every punch, the way you kept Tyler alive, the way you stood your ground while everyone judged you, every part of it says one thing." She swallowed. "You are still the Phantom." Grant shook his head. "The Phantom is dead." "No," Megan said, firmer this time. "The Phantom is not dead. You buried him because you thought you did not deserve to live." Grant turned away. Megan stepped closer. "But you saved Tyler. You saved all of us from our own blindness. Someone who does that is not a coward," Tyler whispered. "You are a legend, but you are also a good man." Grant closed his eyes. That phrase, "good man," stabbed straight into him. He did not believe he was one. Not after Jack died. Not after running for 20 years. But tonight, seeing Tyler collapse under the weight of his own arrogance, seeing Megan stand up for truth, even at the risk of being thrown out, seeing the students tremble, yet try to understand the lesson, something shifted in him. And in that shift, he heard Jack's voice echo like a memory carried by wind. "You are still a good man, Grant." Grant opened his eyes. "All of you," he said, his voice deep but no longer shattered. "I am not the person you think I am. But you are the person we are seeing," Megan replied instantly. Every word pushed Grant closer to a decision he never imagined he would face again. Because the truth was simple. The Phantom was not dead. He had only been asleep. And tonight, when Tyler dragged him onto the mat, when the past was spoken aloud, when the truth could no longer be buried, the Phantom opened his eyes after 2 decades. Grant drew a long breath. "All right," he said softly. "If you want to know who I am," he stepped to the center of the mat. "I will tell you everything." No one breathed, no one moved, no one turned away, because they all knew this moment was history. Grant Miller, Grant, the Phantom, the man the world believed had disappeared, was about to tell a story no one had heard in 20 years. And when he opened his mouth, they all understood that nothing from this moment forward would ever be the same. This was no longer a martial arts class. This was the confession of a legend, and it was also the moment that legend came back to life. Grant stood at the center of the mat, the white neon lights shining across his face, revealing every tired line, every trace of time carved into his eyes, but also revealing something he had spent 20 years trying to hide the strength of truth. Tyler Rhodes stood a few meters away, unable to lift a foot, unable to breathe too hard, feeling as if any wrong movement might cause the air around him to collapse. 1 hour earlier, he had been the most arrogant man in the dojo. Now he was just a lost student trying to find his way back to himself. Grant looked at Tyler not with anger or judgment, but with the gaze of someone who had once destroyed his own life and understood that arrogance was only a jacket worn to hide the holes inside a person. Tyler Grant said, his voice deep like a distant drum roll, "You were wrong." But being wrong is not the end. Tyler swallowed hard, his voice cracking. I feel like I do not even know who I am anymore." Grant stepped forward, each step tugging memories he had buried long ago. "When I caused Jack's death," Grant said slowly, "I was worse than you are now. I felt I did not deserve to live, let alone stand in front of anyone." Megan's eyes softened, shimmering with emotion. Tyler lowered his head, his shoulders trembling as he absorbed a fraction of the pain Grant had carried for 2 decades. Grant continued, "But there is one difference between me and you tonight." Tyler lifted his head, eyes red. "Different how you still have a chance." Tyler froze. The students around him stiffened as well. Grant stepped closer, not forceful, not intimidating, but like a teacher approaching a lost student. "Arrogance is the mask of fear," Grant said. "You fear you are not good enough. You fear you will not be respected. You fear someone else will surpass you." Tyler trembled uncontrollably, the truth bursting out of him in a broken whisper. Yes, I have always been afraid of that." Grant nodded softly. "I know. Because I was you." Silence flooded the dojo. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Grant looked into Tyler's eyes, as if seeing the 33-year-old boy who had spent his entire youth building armor just to hide the smallness he felt inside. "You fight to prove you are strong," Grant said. "I fought to escape my own weakness. And that is why Jack died." Tyler choked tears filling his eyes. Grant lowered his voice, each word landing like a hammer on stone. "If you do not change your life, if you continue using strength to hide fear, one day you will cause a tragedy like I did." Tyler staggered, as if punched by the truth itself. He collapsed to both knees, bowing his head low. "I am sorry. I am sorry to you. I am sorry to everyone. I am sorry to myself." The students watched, not one of them able to mock or smirk. They saw a man removing the heaviest armor of his life. Megan stepped forward slightly, her voice gentle, as if touching an open wound. Tyler apologizing is the first step. Learning again from the beginning is the real one. Tyler nodded firmly. "I will learn. I want to become a teacher, worthy of someone like you." Grant shook his head. "I am not your teacher." Tyler looked up, stunned. "But you taught me the biggest lesson of my life." Grant gave a faint smile, one carrying both sorrow and awakening. "No, Tyler. You changed yourself. I was only a mirror showing you the part you were running from." Megan exhaled softly, her eyes filled with admiration. Grant turned to face the entire class, his gaze steady, sharp, and completely honest. "Look closely at tonight. This is what martial arts must teach, not how to defeat an opponent, but how to face yourself without running." The young faces staring at him no longer held fear, but genuine respect. Grant looked back at Tyler one last time. "You were not defeated tonight. You were awakened." Tyler opened his mouth, but no words escaped his throat, too tight with emotion. Grant turned away, only for Megan's voice to call him back. "Mr. Miller," Grant stopped. If you do not want to be a teacher," Megan said, "then be a guide. Not for fame, not for the past, but because martial arts needs people like you." Grant turned toward her. His eyes wavered slightly. Megan continued, each word trying to open a door he had locked for 20 years. "You do not need to stand in a ring to be strong. You just need to stand right here in this dojo and show us what true strength looks like." Grant's eyes drifted from Megan to Tyler, then to the young students watching him, as if their futures depended on his answer. He drew a slow breath, his shoulders rising. He began. Megan held her breath. The entire dojo held its breath. I do not know if I still have anything to teach. Tyler answered instantly. You just taught me the most important lesson of my life. Another student added, You taught us martial arts is not about showing off strength. A third said, You taught us about responsibility. Megan's voice trembled, but was steady with truth. And you taught us that someone who has fallen can rise again stronger. Grant closed his eyes. The heart he once believed had turned to stone after Jack's death suddenly ached, but this time the ache was warm. Very warm. He opened his eyes. If I teach Grant said there is only one thing I will teach. Tyler whispered, What is it? Grant looked at all of them, his eyes like a beam of light cutting through darkness. I will teach you how to control your strength, not to defeat others, but to defeat yourself. The dojo exhaled collectively, like a single breath released after a long storm. Megan smiled softly, her eyes glowing. Tyler bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the mat. Sensei Grant let out a long breath. For the first time in 20 years, he was not the phantom, and he was not the man running from his past. He was simply himself. And in that moment, the thing he had feared most became the thing he needed most to guide, not to hide. A new chapter began, not just for Grant Miller, but for everyone standing in that room tonight. Because humility had just become the greatest teacher of the man who once believed he was unbreakable. 3 months after that chaotic night, Evergreen Combat Dojo had become an entirely different place, not because it was renovated or advertised, but because its entire spirit had been rebuilt from the ground up. And at the center of that transformation was not Tyler Rhodes, nor the senior students, but the man who once quietly mopped the floors every night, Grant Miller. He no longer wore the blue janitor shirt. He also refused to wear a black belt uniform, despite Tyler begging him at least 10 times. Grant chose a simple white GI with no belt, no symbols, no certificates. When a young student asked Sensei, "Why don't you wear a belt?" Grant only smiled, gentle yet resolute, because a belt does not define who you become. Your breath, your attitude, and the way you treat others, that is your true rank. That sentence spread throughout the dojo like fire, becoming the new principle everyone quoted whenever someone bragged about their achievements. A class that once had 8 students now overflowed with 32 people of all ages. Those who left after Tyler's incident returned, bringing friends, relatives, and even strangers who had heard rumors about the ghost teacher. But what changed the atmosphere was not the number of people. It was the discipline and respect that filled a place once loud and competitive. Tyler Rhodes, the man who used to terrify students with his aggression, now stood quietly in the back row, wearing a brown belt, practicing with the seriousness of a complete beginner. No more barking orders. No more intimidation. Instead, he helped correct beginners' stances, bowed deeply whenever Grant walked by, and often repeated a sentence that shocked everyone who heard it. Start over. Slow down. Do not be like I was. No one expected Tyler to change so quickly, perhaps no one except Grant. He knew that the pain of having one's arrogance exposed was the strongest awakening, but the greatest change didn't lie in Tyler. It lay in Grant. The man who lived 20 years as a shadow now stood in the light without trembling. He did not shout, did not perform, did not stand on a pedestal. He taught through slow movement, through the small details most people overlooked. One breath, one step, One hip rotation off by half an inch. One respectful duck to avoid a strike without humiliating the opponent. Inner strength does not live in muscle, Grant said during one session. It lives in knowing where you are and why you choose to act. Megan stood nearby taking notes for her graduate thesis while listening carefully to every word. She soon realized what Grant taught was unlike any martial arts curriculum she had studied. It was not just technique, it was a philosophy. Once when she asked Sensei, "Why do you dodge strikes so easily?" Grant only shrugged. "Because you strike with a different purpose than I do. You strike to learn. I strike to protect." The entire class fell silent at that. One weekend afternoon, Grant taught the students a stand-still drill that lasted 10 minutes. Many found it funny at first. A boy asked Sensei, "What does this do?" Grant replied, "In a fight, standing still is the hardest thing you will ever do." Tyler nodded immediately, understanding it deeper than anyone else. Megan hid a small smile. She knew Grant was not just teaching martial arts, he was healing, but the dojo's rebirth did not end there. A moment arrived that left the entire class speechless. Grant led everyone onto a bus heading toward Rose City National Cemetery. No one knew where they were going. No one asked. But when they stopped in front of a gravestone that read, "Jack Morrison, 1983 to 2005, the entire group fell silent. Grant knelt. His hand trembled as it touched the cold stone. "This," Grant said, "is the person who taught me the greatest lesson of my life," not in a sad voice, but the voice of someone who had accepted the storm that once tore him apart. He told the story of that night, without excuses, without shifting blame. Tyler bowed deeply. A few younger students cried. Megan wiped tears quietly. "I did not quit martial arts because I feared losing," Grant said. "I quit because I feared winning when I had not yet learned control." The group remained silent, as if attending a sacred ceremony. Grant rose and faced the young faces before him. "And I came back for all of you." The wind swept softly through the hillside trees, like an approving whisper from an old world. On the bus ride back, everyone spoke quietly, nothing like the usual chatter. Tyler sat beside Megan and whispered, "He is not just teaching martial arts. He is saving my life." Megan smiled. "He is saving all of us." When they returned to the dojo, a young student ran up and hugged Grant. "Sensei, I want to be strong like you." Grant knelt and patted the child's head. "You do not need to be strong like me. You only need to be stronger than who you were yesterday." Those words opened a door Grant had avoided for 20 years, the door of becoming a guide instead of a runaway. And right then, Tyler approached again, bowing deeply, not out of fear this time, but out of respect. Sensei Tyler said firmly, "From now on, I want to help you build this dojo the way you want it." Grant looked at him for a long moment, his gaze softening. "You are not helping me. We are doing it together." Tyler froze, then smiled a smile no one believed he was capable of, gentle, genuine, full of determination. And so the place, once filled with shouting, became a place of listening. The place once ruled by ego became a place of humility. The place where a buried legend hid now became the place where that legend was reborn, not to dominate, but to guide. Evergreen Combat Dojo was no longer a gym. It was a family, and Grant Miller, the man who once lost everything, had become its heart. But what Grant did not know was that the greatest chapter of this journey was still ahead. Because once a path is opened, It will always lead him to the place. He never thought he would return to the place where he would not only teach others to control their strength, but finally reclaim his own. On a late afternoon, at the end of the month, as the sun leaned over the low rooftops of Seattle, Grant Miller sat at a small kitchen table in the warm glow of his home, where the scent of hot soup cooked by Piper, his 10-year-old daughter, drifted gently through the air. This was the time of day he treasured most, not because of the quiet, but because it reminded him that no matter how hard life had once knocked him down, he still had something to love, something to protect. Piper rested her chin on her hands and stared at him intently. "Dad, if you're really as good as people, say if you were really a champion, then why did you give it all up to mop floors?" The innocent question pierced straight into the darkest corners of Grant's heart, into the place where he stored every regret. He set his spoon down and looked into her brown eyes that were identical to her mother's, the woman who had left when his life collapsed into darkness after Jack's death. "Because I was scared," Grant said softly, his voice like a breeze. "I was scared my strength would hurt someone again." Piper tilted her head. "But you didn't hurt anyone at the dojo. You even saved Mr. Tyler." Grant gave a small smile, the kind of smile he had not seen on his own face in 10 years. "Yes, but what matters isn't how strong I am," he replied. "What matters is knowing when to use that strength." Piper thought for a moment, then asked, "So do you regret it?" Giving up martial arts, Grant looked at his hands, the hands that once wore gloves, once held championship belts, once sent his best friend to the floor forever. "Yes," he admitted quietly, "I regret it every day, because I thought I only had 2 choices: be a danger or disappear." Piper pressed both hands on the table, serious like an adult. "But now you have a 3rd choice." Grant froze. "A 3rd choice." Piper beamed. "Become a teacher." The words made something inside Grant tremble in a way he had not felt in years. Not fear. Not pain. Hope. A small spark, but enough to pierce the fog that had covered him for 20 long years. He reached out and ruffled her hair. "You're right," Grant whispered. "I never realized that could be its own kind of strength." Piper grinned. "I knew it. You teach me math better than my teacher anyway." Grant laughed, a sound so rare it lit up the whole kitchen. But as Piper turned back to her homework, Grant looked at her quietly and felt something important. He was not only teaching martial arts to his students, he was teaching Piper how to face life with courage, something he had once failed to do. That night after Piper fell asleep, Grant put on his coat and walked to Rose City Cemetery. He went there every week, but tonight was different. Tonight he was not there for forgiveness. He was there to share hope. The sky was dark, lit only by distant amber lamps and the sound of wind threading through the trees. Grant stood before Jack's gravestone and touched the cold stone gently. "Jack," he said softly, "I thought I could never become anything except the man who carried that mistake. But tonight my daughter showed me there's a path I never dared to take." The wind blew stronger as if listening. "I still remember you," Grant continued, "but I am not running anymore. I'm going to teach these kids so they never repeat what I did. I'll teach them to use strength to protect, not to prove." He pressed his hand against the stone, and for the first time in 2 decades, he felt something lift from his chest. "And if you can hear me, I hope you know I'm trying to live a life you'd be proud of." When Grant walked out of the cemetery, the pain from 20 years ago was still there, But it was no longer a chain dragging him down. It had become a guidepost, a reminder, a compass for how he would lead the students who now trusted him. And the next morning when he returned to the dojo, voices greeted him. "Good morning, Sensei Grant." "Sensei, what are we practicing today, Sensei?" "I did the hip rotation, just like you showed me." Grant looked at each face, Tyler helping a new student adjust her stance, Megan scribbling notes, a shy young girl tying her white belt, and his heart understood one undeniable truth. He was no longer the man who mopped floors to hide from his past. He was the teacher they chose. And more importantly, he was the man he chose to become. This was not only the rebirth of a dojo, it was the rebirth of Grant Miller himself. And for the first time in 20 years, he allowed himself to believe one simple truth. He deserved it. 1 year after the night, everything changed. Evergreen Combat Dojo was no longer just a training hall. It had become a community, a family, a place where anyone who stepped inside could feel a warmth that had never existed there before. The laughter of children mixed with the steady breaths of adults rediscovering themselves. Tyler, once the source of chaos, was now one of the pillars of the dojo, patiently correcting hip rotations and weight shifts for new students, as if he were teaching his younger self how to heal. Megan, who had graduated with a perfect score on her thesis about abuse of power in sports environments, often returned to the dojo to take notes, observe, or sometimes simply sit and listen to Grant share a few simple yet profound philosophies. She would say, "No professor has ever taught me as much as the things you say while standing on the mat." Grant only smiled. He never called himself a teacher, but everyone else called him that, with absolute respect. That morning, the class was so full that they had to split into separate sessions. Sunlight poured through the window and illuminated a newly framed photo on the wall, a group shot with Grant, standing in the center, his hands resting gently on the shoulders of 2 smiling children. The caption beneath it read, "Strength is when we help others stand." Grant looked at the photo, and a feeling filled his heart, a feeling he thought he would never experience again after 20 years' peace. Piper rushed into the dojo, her backpack still bouncing behind her. Dad, I got an A+ on my hero essay." Grant laughed and bent down to hug her. "So who was your hero?" Piper squeezed his hand. "You." "But I didn't write that you were a fighter. I wrote that you teach people how to be kind." Grant froze for a moment, then pulled her closer. Not because he was proud, but because for the first time he heard an image of himself he never believed possible, a good man. The class began. Footsteps echoed across the mats. The sound of GI fabric brushing together filled the room, and shouts of Osu rang with determination. Grant stood before them and looked at the many faces, each holding a different story. Some came to grow stronger. Some came to conquer fear. Some to stop being bullied. Some to heal invisible wounds. "Today," Grant said, "we are not starting with technique." A rustle moved through the class. As everyone sat, curiosity buzzing in the air, Grant stepped into the center and placed a hand over his chest. "Today we start with why you are here." He tapped his heart. "You do not come here to defeat anyone. You come here to defeat yourselves, your fear, your anger, your doubt." Tyler nodded firmly. Megan smiled softly. A few new students felt tears well up without knowing why. Grant continued, "I used to think strength was about knocking down an opponent. But this past year, I learned something far more important. that he paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. True strength is helping someone stand when they fall. A round of applause spread through the dojo, not loud, but steady and full of respect. That day's training felt different. Grant gently adjusted the hand position of a frail boy, encouraged a single mother learning self-defense, and laughed with Tyler as he struggled through a new technique. No one in the dojo felt inadequate. They all felt like they were moving forward, even if only by one small step. After class, Grant stood outside, breathing in the cool afternoon air. Megan walked up beside him, holding her completed thesis. "I brought you a copy," she said softly. "I based the most important chapter on your story." Grant held the thesis, looked at her name on the cover, then said, "Thank you. But the credit is not mine." Megan shook her head with a smile. "No, you are wrong. The credit belongs to the man who faced the truth and turned pain into a lesson." Grant did not reply, but in his eyes there was something like sunlight breaking through after 20 years of darkness. When Megan left, Piper ran up and grabbed his hand. "Dad, can we visit Mr. Jack's grave today?" Grant nodded. The two of them walked to the nearby cemetery. Standing before Jack's gravestone, Grant knelt and placed his hand on the cold stone. "Jack," he whispered, "I am living the way you wanted me to live. I am not running anymore." Piper laid a flower on the grave and looked up at her father with pride. "Dad, what did you tell?" Mr. Jack Grant smiled and gazed at the sunset settling over the horizon. "I told him, I am trying to do the most important thing." "What is that?" Grant stood holding her hand. "When winning is no longer everything, the most important thing is knowing how to lift others up." Piper leaned her head against his arm and murmured, "You're doing great." And in that moment, Grant Miller understood that his legacy was not in 47 victories, nor in world titles, nor in the nickname Phantom. His legacy lived only in the place where true strength can exist in the people he had helped rise again. And that was the greatest victory of his life. From the perspective of an expert in strength psychology and human behavior, Grant Miller's journey reveals a timeless truth. Strength does not lie in the punch that knocks an opponent down, but in the ability to look inward and choose to become a better version of oneself, even when that choice demands the deepest pain. A fighter may win dozens of matches, but only the one who confronts his past truly wins at life. Grant's story reminds us that self-control, responsibility, and compassion will always be stronger than any title or rank earned in the ring. If this story resonates with you, please like and subscribe to follow more human and inspiring journeys, and leave a comment with the phrase "Sukman," that to let me know you believe that what sets us apart is not what we can knock down, but what we can lift up.